welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to be objectively exploring a super fascinating and honestly pretty intense philosophical text all about how fear impacts the human spirit. Now, just a quick note right up front. All the generated video and audio content we're digging into today comes directly from the founder of LifeChain, Shui Feng. And as you'll see, this text doesn't just look at fear as your standard everyday emotion. No, it treats it as a fundamental existential threat to our very spiritual existence. It's a really interesting framework, so let's dive right in. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to hit 4 distinct parts. First, what is spiritual life? Second, the true root of fear. Third, the illusion of death. And finally, part 4, transcending fear. But before we get into the really deep specifics, the source material asks us to pause and consider a profound psychological and spiritual question. What actually happens to our inner life when fear takes complete control? I mean, we all experience fear, right? It's human. But the text we are examining today argues that fear isn't just an unpleasant passing feeling. It's an active, destructive force. It essentially asks us to imagine a scenario where our decisions are no longer guided by logic or morality, but purely by panic. What gets lost in that moment of surrender? Keep that question in the back of your mind as we go through this. Okay, let's kick things off with section 1. What is spiritual life? So, according to Shui Feng, spiritual life, which is Lingming in Chinese, isn't just some vague sense of being a quote-unquote good person. It's actually a highly specific state. It's the state achieved when a living being connects its consciousness directly to the source of life. The text describes it as a literal unification with the Creator, or God. So the implication here is that your physical life is just the baseline, right? True spiritual life is an active, conscious connection to that divine source. It's an ultimate state of oneness. But here is the catch, and it's a big one. This is where the core conflict of the essay really begins. That divine connection is incredibly fragile. The text sets up a very stark absolute rule. Yielding to fear destroys your spiritual life. Shui Feng argues that if a person abandons God and yields to what he terms the devil, simply out of fear, that spiritual connection gets completely severed on the spot. The spiritual life basically ends right there. In this philosophical framework, it's a total zero-sum game. You absolutely cannot hold on to your divine connection while simultaneously bowing down to fear. Which brings us right into section 2, the true root of fear. Shui Feng sets up a really fascinating psychological contrast here. He argues that the deepest, truest root of fear actually isn't external danger at all. It's internal selfishness. He says selfish desires inevitably lead to a heart completely controlled by fear. You know, the fear of losing what you have, or maybe the fear of not getting what you want. But on the flip side, if your actions are driven by truth, goodness, beauty, and love, the result is a totally clear, fearless conscience. It's like in a mind filled with those positive qualities, there is quite literally no room for fear to even take root. The internal state entirely dictates the external reaction. So how do you actually put that into practice? According to the essay, living completely without fear requires sticking to a pretty strict ethical code. You have to avoid violating heavenly laws, do not commit illegal acts, do not harm society or nature, and basically maintain a perfectly clear and bright conscience. The logic is pretty straightforward. If you have absolutely no selfish motives to hide or protect, you are entirely transparent. And because you're transparent, you are totally fearless. All right, let's move on to section 3, the illusion of death. Now this is where Shui Feng's worldview gets really intense. In this text, the fear of death is not treated as just a normal biological instinct. It's described as a manufactured scam run by a negative force, which he refers to as the devil. So step 1 of the scam is manufacturing this profound, paralyzing fear of death in a person. Step 2 uses that exact fear to force the human being to submit, compromise their core principles, and ultimately abandon the Creator. But the truly tragic part is step 3. The text argues that after making you abandon your spiritual life, that negative force destroys you anyway. It's the ultimate bait and switch. You lose your spiritual life trying to save your physical life. But at the end of the day, you lose both. And to back this up, the text makes this wild, but honestly totally relatable claim about human psychology. It says that as long as someone is fundamentally afraid of dying, they will effortlessly find 10,000 reasons to compromise their principles, 10,000 excuses to submit to this negative force. It really highlights how fear essentially hijacks our brain's rationalization process. Because if survival is your absolute only goal,
well, your integrity suddenly becomes infinitely negotiable.
And that leads us to our final section, Part 4, Transcending Fear. To drive this point home, Shufeng actually pulls in some Western Christian scripture. He quotes Jesus Christ saying, "Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul." The text uses this quote to argue that physical threats, and he specifically mentions threats from presidents, the police, bandits, or hooligans, are fundamentally limited. The absolute worst thing they can possibly do to you is destroy your physical body. They have literally zero power to touch that spiritual life or soul we defined earlier. Therefore, rationally speaking, within this framework, there's just no logical reason to fear them. Okay, so what is the actual practical philosophical solution offered by the founder here? Well, transcending fear requires a complete and total surrender of control. You have to place your life entirely in God's hands. And actually, he weaves in Eastern philosophy here too, stating that you must allow the Tao, the fundamental way or flow of the universe, to arrange your life path. By doing that, you actively let go of the fear of death or the fear of imprisonment. Because think about it, if the Tao is arranging your life, then whatever happens, even if it looks like a total disaster to your physical eyes, is exactly what's meant to be. That kind of absolute trust completely neutralizes anxiety. And the text actually takes this idea of surrender a step further, making a bold, almost radical claim. It states that if a person faces imprisonment or even faces death, specifically because they are following the way of God or the path of Chanyuan, it is absolutely not a tragedy. Instead, it's a profound glory. Shufeng writes that the entire universe will celebrate a true spiritual glory for a life that actively chooses spiritual integrity over mere physical survival. It completely flips the script on victimhood, right? It turns persecution into the ultimate spiritual victory. So ultimately, Zufeng presents us with a pretty stark binary choice. On the one hand, if you remain trapped in selfish desires, you are essentially condemning yourself to lifelong fear. But on the other hand, if you can let go of those desires, you get to experience what he calls your Tathagata nature. That's an Eastern concept referring to your true, awakened, and enlightened self. And living that out allows you to experience a heavenly existence. The bottom line is, you simply cannot experience this awakened state while you're still clutching on to your selfish desires. So based on this entire philosophical framework designed by Shufeng, we want to leave you with one final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If fear is truly born from selfish desire, what would your life actually look like if you just let go of both? Imagine a day, or a week, or even a whole lifetime operating completely without the weight of wanting things just for yourself, and consequently, without that paralyzing fear of losing them. It's a really challenging, provocative idea, but maybe, just maybe, it's the actual key to ultimate freedom. Thank you so much for joining me today. We really hope this gave you something meaningful to think about.